We both know why you are here. The question is, do I have what you need? Now, I'm going to say yes. Here's a snippet. That is a tier list. How did I craft the tier list? Is it just another remake of what someone else has done? No, this one's authentic in several different ways. I'll have to explain. There's quite a lot to unravel. The core question is very simple. Why are you here? Why are you not learning as effectively as you should? Why is there information that you seem to read and then forget? Why does it feel like you're wasting your time? The more time you put into your reading and your studies, the less you remember. Why do you feel so demotivated while studying? Now, all of that theoretically could be answered by what I'm about to present. Who am I? That's a really good question. Well, I am Dr. Rikus Buert. I've completed many years of studies, as well as mentoring students for the last 7 years. And what we're about to embark on is the collective knowledge of all that experience in terms of what works, what doesn't work. We're also going to consider what science says, and I'll even include some references to journal articles to help back up the information, because hey, I mean, if you're not backing things up here, that's just opinion. And if it's opinion, it's not going to help you, and if it's not going to help you, you're not going to get better grades. So it's kind of important. Stay tuned for that. Let's launch right in. Hi there. You've likely considered the idea that the current study processes that you are using in your daily routines are maybe not the best methods out there. You jump onto YouTube, you do a quick search, you find a whole bunch of videos that are meant to help you with your study processes. You've watched maybe 5 or 10, this might be the 11th video you click on, and so far you're finding you've come up empty. It's almost like you watched the video, but maybe it's not quite sunk in, or you haven't quite found the right match. This is the last tier list video you will ever need to watch, but in saying that, there will be more, so stay tuned for future videos on the same topic, because there's so many study techniques I can't cover them all in one session. But why would you want to continue? What are we here to do? Why are we even searching? What is the question we're seeking to answer? It's very simple. Most of us use highly ineffective study techniques. So that general process would look something like taking our resource, reading information, beginning to make our own notes or summary from that information, then repeating that process. So revision. Now, the more times we revise, the more we generally remember. If we're really bad at time management, well, it's kind of cruel, but the end result there is we end up cramming. What does cramming do? Well, cramming stores things in short-term memory, and if we need it later on, or if we have to retrieve it for whatever reason, maybe it's our job or a test, or maybe a surprise test 2 years after having apparently learned the information, well, that's when we discover that we didn't actually learn the information, or at least we didn't remember it when we needed to recall it. Now, while we're here, I must, before we launch into this tier list, explain a very simple process, which is memory. How exactly do we get memories into our minds? Well, it's a very simple 3-step process, breaking it down to its absolute bare minimum. There's encoding, which is the ability to take whatever is in front of us and begin to find ways to enter that into our memory. Then there is storage, which is very simply put, where we're going to put the information, and generally you're going to call that your actual memory. And then there's the third step, which is retrieval. Now, retrieval is only possible if the memory is being held onto. Now, it's actually really complicated, and there'll be a related video on the actual processes that all intertwine to create what is our memory. And this entire process, I mean, there's things like our visual perception, how long things stay in our visual perception, or using the different senses and how those senses impact our ability to remember. Then there's things like structuring and pruning the information. Being able to create order within that information is really important. Now, if we put all of that together, we end up with our memory process. Now, study techniques are quite unique because they come in and boost certain components within the system. But here's the first problem with what I'm going to say is all the tier list and study method videos, or at least all the ones I've seen. There may be a few that I haven't watched. To put it very simply, it's chaos. It's absolute chaos, because we look at all of these techniques, and by my count, there's over 120 different study techniques. No one's taken the time to sort them. There is no order, there's no particular way in which we use them, and come to think of it, no one's even organized them in terms of effectivity. There are some journal articles out there, and a lot of YouTubers have jumped on the trend there as well of grabbing those and putting that out for you guys to watch, which is great. I mean, that's really beneficial. But is that the best method? No, there's something even better, which is this video. We're going to go through the tier list. We're going to take at least 24 different techniques. I'd love to do more, but it's just too many, and you'll be overloaded, I'll be overloaded, so not a good deal. So we'll go through 24 study techniques, and we'll arrange them according to our tier list. Now, a couple of key things on this tier list that we need to cover. The first one is the actual tiers within the information. We're going to go for a classic sort of 5-level tier list. list going from A, which is decent, all the way to F. But that's kind of bland and boring and very typical. You'll see that all over the internet. So let's make it even more interesting. I'm going to add 2 bonus categories. There's also going to be an S tier, which is really high, and even higher than the S tier, we're going to have Diamond tier. Now, ideally, we'd probably use a combination of these 7 different categories within our learning. And just a brief example to get us warmed up, something like rereading information would be a really low tier, or generally called in literature at least, a highly ineffective study technique, or low utility. So that's generally something we want to avoid. Now, it doesn't mean that you absolutely should ignore it, because the reality is we're probably still going to do it, but relying on that alone is the worst method for learning new information. That means we need more sophisticated study techniques to actually ensure that we improve our memory of information. To add another level of detail to our tier list, I've also included a difficulty for each of these study strategies. Now, the reason for that is to give us some sort of indication of how challenging the particular technique is to implement in our daily system, or what I'm going to call your learning framework. So think of it like resistance. How much resistance will there be for you to incorporate it into your normal schedule? Now, for some of them, it's really challenging because they require other soft skills that some of us may not have developed. A classic example would be time management. Some of the techniques require exceptional time management. And if your time management is not well developed, well, you're going to have trouble implementing this study technique. But we'll deal with that in future videos. Stay tuned for those. There is one more thing. Earlier I mentioned that we're going to create order in this information. We're going to create categories. I need to explain the categories really simple. The first category is going to be what I'm going to call study technique. What are study techniques? They're specific procedures that we employ in our learning to boost the efficiency of our learning. And generally, they have a slight bias towards improving the encoding process of memory. The second category of interest is going to be memory technique. Now, memory techniques are the classic, which I believe most of us have had some experience with. What are memory techniques? Well, they are very specific devices that are designed to boost the retention of information by ensuring that it reaches our long-term storage. Next category is study method. Study methods are processes that very specifically focus on changing or controlling factors that are known to influence our learning. Now, considered together, that gives us ST, MT, and SM, which together I abbreviate to a very simple acronym, STM. Is it a coincidence that that is the exact meaning of short-term memory? No, probably not. Is short-term memory involved? Yes. If anything, short-term memory is what we're trying to conquer in this journey. Because if you put information in your short-term memory, it doesn't remain there very long, maybe in the order of minutes. So in order to get that information into your long-term memory so you can retain it for a longer period, we have to somehow conquer the short-term memory process. This is it. STM is the answer. We will take this categorization, take all of our study techniques, we'll lump them into our tier list and create what will be the ultimate tier list. But stay tuned, there will be more of these clearly, but only if we get like 1,000 likes, I think. Otherwise, no point doing more if people aren't finding value in this video. So if you do find value, make sure to share it with other people. If you think it's worthy of a like, give it a like. If you think it's worthy of a sub, but only sub if you feel like you're going to continue watching and if you find benefit, or if you seek more knowledge in terms of improving your study, maybe improving some of those soft skills, and just generally becoming a more highly functional human being. Okay, let's launch into this tier list. Now, to present all of these study strategies, and to make it far more beneficial than what we normally see in these tier list videos, I've created very symbolic images that will help us to take all of that information and provide even more sorting of this information. Let's launch into the first study technique, which is rereading. Have you been using rereading? I think I started with rereading as well. It's probably the most common technique. We all start there. Hopefully we all realize that is a terrible technique. Why is it so bad? Very, very simple. The amount that we can encode is limited by this technique. And take note, being a study technique, that also refers very heavily to its ability to encode information. So rereading, terrible. We won't even spend time on it. It's very easy to implement, but it's a terrible technique. The next one, every student loves this one, or at least is experienced in this one. It's called cramming. So what's cramming? Well, no pain, no gain. The idea is you're lacking in time management. You leave everything to the last minute, or maybe you're horrible at looking at dates on tests, and then you discover you have a test, and then you suddenly have to cram through all the material, getting yourself ready. So how does this one work? Well, it's all short term. We lock things into short term memory. It's relatively effective actually. You'll see it feature again a little bit higher up in the tier list, a bit of a modification, but generally it's a terrible technique because none of it gets past short-term memory. It all gets locked up in what I would call sort of an enhanced short-term memory. The next one's fascinating. Highlighting pages. Now, I'm sure all of us have seen someone do this, or maybe we do this ourselves. Highlights are amazing, color is amazing, and there is some benefit to using color within our note-making process. But the problem is it's very limited benefit. Being able to highlight information by itself is not actually helping with encoding information. At the very least, it can help to sort of sort information and provide some idea of the structure that you have to create. That's really it. So highlighting, terrible. In fact, it's so bad, I'm not even going to add it to the tier list. So honorable mention. Now, next one that's quite interesting is hydration. And we're going to put this one into the category of a study method. So hydration, I bet you didn't see that one coming, but a lot of students actually use this. And there is actually quite a lot of science to suggest that being well hydrated is actually going to improve your ability to encode memories. But does that mean you want to hydrate during your exams or while you're studying? I'm going to say yes, you want to be well hydrated, but if you're not in a state of being dehydrated, don't see this method having all that much impact. And keep in mind, the benefit is really low because you are just enhancing your normal function, or at least restoring your normal function. So it doesn't actually improve your memory of information. So that by itself, I'm going to put it into F tier. And that nails all the F tiers in place. Let's jump on to E tier. Okay, the first one in E tier is the memory jog. As the name implies, it's trying to boost those memory connections that we form through a quick memory jog. I think most of us do this one instinctively as well. The idea would be you read through some information, then you quickly test your ability. And I guess saying it out loud there, it sounds very similar to active recall, but active recall is much better than just a memory jog. The memory jog is simply going through the information, reading it again, and checking or revising the information, thinking that we're revising. That one's really, really inefficient. But the idea is testing recall. We're going to lump that one into study technique because that is a process we're using while we are learning information, or at least trying to learn information. Not very effective, super easy to do. Now, the next one's relatively powerful, but this whole topic of visualization, I think has lost a bit of steam ever since the learning styles got a bit of a debunk. Now, does that mean learning styles are just being thrown out the window because they're no longer relevant? Yeah, kind of, but at the same time, I would encourage you to still remain multimodal, but we'll explain that in a future video. Stay tuned for that as well. Very, very important because more senses will enhance your ability to encode information, even if it doesn't actually improve your memory. It does help you to be more alert. Being more alert can enhance your ability to store information. So it's more indirect, but we'll test that in future videos. Stay tuned for that. But for now, visualization. Why is that so good? Well, it's the idea of mental picturing. And I feel like this one would be higher in the list if more people were able to visualize things that they learn. This one's sort of a hit or miss. Some people have the ability to form mental pictures of concepts. Others just can't see anything and they look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean you can see a picture in your brain? I'm not joking, literally, I can see pictures in my brain. So fascinating how that one works, but everyone's different. So if that one works for you, go for it. It's half decent. There are reasons why it's limited, but we'll put it into E tier because I think the versatility is not great and there are much better techniques. Next one. Now this one's quite common and it's a little bit better than just rereading information. It's dual coding. The idea of being, shall we say, multimodal. You'll see the connection there. And very simply put, you're going to combine at least two senses when you go through information. The classic would be recording auditory notes of your lecturers speaking at university, or writing down some written notes, or taking your written notes and combining your auditory recordings, or taking a textbook and taking your handwritten notes. Whatever the method is, you're incorporating at least two different sources of the information and you're beginning to integrate those. So we're going to put that one down in the E tier. It's really not that beneficial, and there's a lot of science to back that up as well. Let's jump on to D tier. First one for D tier is prioritization. Seems like an unusual one to have as a study technique, but this is actually quite beneficial if used correctly. The idea of urgency. Now this one's an indirect impact upon our learning. This would generally take the shape of being able to discern what is going to be most important to spend the most amount of time on. So maybe it's something that you identify as being one of your weaknesses within your memory. So you put in more time, you're putting more focus into that task, which sounds like a good thing on paper. So it does work relatively well, and thus we put more effort into it and we end up learning a little bit more, but it still depends on what we use to do that revision. But this is very indirect, but the idea of prioritizing what is important can give us a nice encoding boost. So we'll put it in D tier, not the best method, but it's at least better than just rereading the information. The next one. This one's going to be a hotly debated topic. Music mnemonics. Something like the periodic song, perhaps. Now, for some people, this is an absolutely overpowered method. For other people, this one's horrible. They remember nothing. So I'm going to put it similar to visualization. Some people, that's a really good technique. For other people, it's terrible. I'm going to even it out somewhere around D tier. For you, it might be higher, or maybe it's even lower, but it's somewhere in this bracket. So what's the idea? Well, that's taking the power of music, incorporating some of the terms or concepts that we need to know into the music, and then being able to package it in a way that we remember, if we can remember the melody or the tunes or the lyrics to the song. Now, the problem I have with this method is the fact that it forms in a linear string, which means you have to be able to sing the song and accurately form the connections between all of those terms in order to utilize what you're learning. The problem is, if you jump somewhere in the middle, and I'll give you a quick example, if I ask for element number 1, you're going to say hydrogen. If I ask for element number 5, you're going to go hydrogen, there's helium, lithium. So it takes a little bit longer, but you get to boron. If I ask for element number 40, you're going to go, oh, that's awkward. It's zirconium, by the way. So, I mean, how are you meant to fly through and find it? Because that would take ages. You have to count all the way through. So that's awkward. And I mean, what if they ask for number 30? It's zinc, by the way. So, I mean, then you're going to have to do that again. And it's like really awkward. Like, how do you count through really quickly to find it? Or what if they choose a random number? It's like 17, chlorine. So, I mean, that just gets really awkward. Or if they do number 37, rubidium. I mean, how are you meant to like jump around and just like very quickly find it? It would take ages to sing the song. It's not a good method, but there are better methods. And watch a related video. I've actually got a full video on how to memorize the elements. Stay tuned for part 2 on that, where we take you through learning elements 21 to 40. But for the time being, elements 1 to 20, it's a breeze. Really, really easy to remember those. Next tier item. Now, this one gets quite a lot of popularity on the tier list by other creators as well. Study space. More importantly, the concept of clearing our study space so we have a nice, neat environment. This one I've lumped into a study method. It is something we employ to sort of enhance our environment, which is meant to help us stay focused. Now, I'd also lump in something like taking your cell phone and uninstalling apps to keep you focused, TikTok, Facebook, all of those social media apps that normally distract us, or maybe it's just purely getting your desk nice and tidy, getting all your utensils ready, getting your notepad ready, getting all your textbooks nice and neat. That clean study environment positively influences our learning and creates that situation that hopefully is reflective of what it will be like in the examination room, which gives us that ability to more effectively encode information. So we'll call it an indirect productivity boost, but it does actually help us. Not too bad. It's not too bad, but by itself doesn't boost our memory a tremendous amount. Just makes us more efficient. Now the next one's great. I've put it into C tier, which is relatively ambitious, but only because that's a technique that I used through, I think, at least up to like first year of university, until I discovered it was horrible. But very simple. It's copying your notes. The idea is you've made like your summary notes of the textbook, the lecture slides, the auditory recordings, whatever you've used, and now you're beginning to take that and repeat that information. So not quite blindly copying, but you're testing your memory. It's like a retrieval process. You're trying to test if you can remember what you have written. So that revision and repetition, if you do it enough times, eventually you learn it. So put it into study technique, but not very efficient. There's a few bits missing, which we'll discover on the higher items on the tier list. But with repetition, I mean, it's not a half bad technique. It's still better than just reading it. Now, the next technique is massed practice, also known as cramming. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've had cramming, and that was a terrible technique in F tier. But this one's different. This one's more of a cramming with a little bit more of a purpose or intent. So example could be discovering your test is due in a set number of hours. Then you jump on to a school resource, you find as many test papers you can find, and then you start cramming your way through all the test papers. The idea being it's what we cram that really makes the difference here. But irrespective, it still has that fundamental limitation. Although a lot of students do use it because you feel like you're really effective with your time and you're maximizing your learning, sort of applying all the positive psychology that we need to do well, fundamental property here is that we're not getting the information into long-term storage. It's put into like a unique form of short-term memory where we retain it, we remember it for our test or exam, and then shortly after it's all deleted because it's just not relevant or was poorly encoded into storage for numerous reasons. We'll deal with those in future videos, but there it is. massed practice whatever your format is for that technique, but very easy to do. Now, the next one's a classic, SQ3R. We'll put it into C tier. This is a method that we use, we'll call it a study method, that can help us to organize information before we begin to try to learn it. So it's a note-taking method. Now, if you are interested in this one, I have done a related video on this one already. Check it out if you want to learn how to use this in your learning process. Yes, it's only C tier, but it is a great method for note-taking, which by itself isn't going to boost your memory, but if you study the notes using other methods, hey, it becomes pretty effective. Next one here is summarizing. Now, not all students have discovered the power of summarizing. The concept is very simple. As it implies, you're going to take all the resources that you're given, you're going to try and condense it down into a simple, say, A4 summary of the information. Now, depending on your level, that often expands out. I think for some subjects, for my own experience, condensing a whole topic down might have taken like 3 pages. So by the end of it, you end up with quite a lot of notes, there's quite a lot of detail, and generally it's a little bit difficult to actually retrieve the information. But it's relatively effective in that we can encode the information and it does usually get into short-term memory quite happily, but the challenge is getting it to remain in long-term for a long period, which by itself doesn't happen. The summary itself doesn't always transfer into long-term memory. So not a bad technique, but there are better methods. The next one is keyword mnemonics, which is related to another technique, but this particular one is, I'm going to say, difficult to implement. The keyword mnemonic is one where we take something that we need to learn, like a new concept or process. Maybe you're familiar with classic one in biology, the test for if something is a living thing. Mrs. C. Gren, and if you're confused as to why there's a C, I include C for the word control, because living things have control. And if you're wanting to test that out, try and persuade someone that fire is not a living thing using Mrs. Gren. Good luck to you. You'll see Mrs. Gren does not disprove that fire is a living thing. Add the C, does fire have control? No control whatsoever. Do cells have control? Absolutely. So very interesting. But in order to apply this technique, we would take words that are related to what we need to remember and incorporate that into whatever the acronym is that we may have used or the mnemonic. So in this example, if it's Mrs. Seagrin, you could do Mr. Seagrins as an example. And by doing that, we try and enhance the encoding of the information. If we do this well, we actually manage to encode it into our memory, particularly long-term memory, which is very beneficial. The challenge is still retrieval, but if we rehearse it, we actually manage to store the memory relatively well. If we need to retrieve it, we usually pull it off, so that's not too bad for a memory technique. Now, this one is probably slightly underrated, but the only reason it's in B tier is because it doesn't have such a direct impact upon your learning, but it's positive mindset. I can only understate the importance of having a positive mindset. There's an entire field of positive psychology that will prove the importance of this. So, very simple process. All you need is a belief in your own ability to learn. By accommodating that positive mindset, you're able to enhance your ability to encode information. And again, it's indirect, but just having that positive mindset on your learning, viewing the information, accepting the challenge, and seeing your own potential and being able to achieve what you're learning, you're actually going to enhance your coding because you're enhancing your attention. So indirect, but still really effective. And I highly encourage incorporating this one into anything that you study. Retain that positive mindset on the information. Really, really important. Positive self-talk. There it is. Next one. This one's unusual, and you may never have heard of it, but I love including this one. It's called the Socratic method. Where does it come from? Well, it comes from ancient Greece, way back. The philosopher called Socrates. Now, Socrates was a very interesting character. Definitely read up on him if you find philosophy interesting. But one technique that he left us that I think is invaluable is the Socratic method. Some teachers probably incorporate this technique naturally. Sometimes I think we instinctively do this technique as well. But the idea is questioning, and it's most basic form, questioning the question that formulated the question. You're going into deep levels of understanding by asking questions about how things are derived. Now, it's more of a teaching method, but very powerful if you use this in your learning, because then you're beginning to push the understanding. You're not just rote learning information, You're trying to understand, well, why does this happen? Why does this connect to this? Why is this interaction there? And it actually requires going beyond the notes that you've been given. Often it's a quick Google search, or in the modern age, you could be using AI, whatever is part of your normal learning process, to try and boost your understanding of the information. That's why this one is so powerful. But it creates a link. We're drawing connections to different information to boost our, shall we say, cognitive map that we form when we start to learn information. Okay, the next one is distributed practice. Not quite as intuitive as it needs to be, but very similar, and in fact it has other names as well, like spaced learning. This one I think we all figure out pretty early on. We know instinctively it's important, but it's really difficult to implement for some of us, mostly due to time management skills. Now, distributed practice simply requires us to look at information at one point in time and then to revise that information at a later point in time. It's not particularly organized, so it's relatively easy to do. We maybe look at our resource in the morning and then check it again at night or the next time we go to study it. But there's no planning or organization, which is why it's only an A tier. If we add more organization and more repetition, we begin to combat the forgetting curve. Ebbinghaus did an amazing job deriving the forgetting curve, but we'll cover more powerful techniques soon enough that actually enhances this process even further. Stay tuned for that. The next one is regular revision. See the connection to the previous one? We're taking information that we have, and we're trying to review that information over time. We'd probably set up a bit of a schedule. We'll say, oh, we'll revise it on the following days and try and fit it into our learning schedule or exam timetable. Now, regular revision by itself, really powerful technique. I think the difficulty with this technique is being able to fit in multiple revisions, and the core question is still, what are you revising? Usually it's going to be your summaries, and I think it's the volume. Volume catches us off guard, or maybe the way in which we're formulating our notes catches us off guard, and then we struggle to do multiple revisions of the information. But that is pretty effective. Next technique, the mind map. Mind maps are incredible. In fact, if I had to choose a single technique that I myself found most beneficial that I'm still using on a daily basis, it is the mind map. So why are mind maps so powerful? Tony Bazan did a great job when deriving this concept. It's very, very simple. We start with a focus keyword in the inner level of our map. We then begin to hinge related words, but what is key in this process is the structure of the information, creating the organization of the information. And this should be customized. You wouldn't just want to take the sample that your table of contents has. You want to craft your own structure because then it's memorable. If you're taking someone else's structure or taking someone else's notes, you don't tend to remember it. So this is the power of the mind map. The mind map, I will say, works really well for people who have the ability to visualize things. And I'm not joking. To me, this one is like cheating because when I got into my exams, once I discovered the technique later in my studies, I could literally walk into exam. I could visualize the entire mind map and then I could reproduce it. So it feels like cheating because you're literally able to write out your notes in your test or exam if you need it. But you wouldn't have to do the detail. You'd only do the outer layer. If you can recall the outer layer, all the inner bits just come back to your mind because you have a point of reference. It's really important. We'll deal with that more in future videos. On to the next one. The classic mnemonic. These are incredibly powerful. The reason I've put them into S tier is because they have the ability to give us what I'm going to call a hook. We can hook this or latch this into our existing memories, and it's very easy to retrieve because it creates a nice package or structure that we can recall. And technically, we're incorporating multiple techniques with the mnemonic, which is what makes them so memorable. So example there, converting confusion into logic, CCIL or CCIL perhaps. So these are really easy to remember when we start to create some sort of logical order within our acronym. A little bit tricky to create. You do have to spend a bit of time to make them, but I would say they are incredibly beneficial. So absolutely incorporate those into your learning process. Next one's a classic. I'm sure you expected to feature on this list, the Pomodoro technique. It's a very simple technique. There are lots of variations of it, but very simply put, the idea is that we study for 30 minutes. We're incorporating a state of hyper-focus, dare I even say, entering the flow state. With the idea being that we're really efficient with our time, and thus it's a study method that helps us to focus and apply our attention on the material at hand. So we set a single goal, we focus on it for 30 minutes, and after that we give our brain a rest. That rest is really important, but That rest shouldn't be 30 minutes walking around, although it could be if you need it. It shouldn't be 30 minutes of gaming or 30 minutes of chatting to a friend or 30 minutes of social media or 30 minutes of YouTube shorts. Maybe that's why you're here, in which case, well done. But don't do that. But the idea here is we take a short break to reset our focus, to reset our attention, and then we repeat. Pretty good technique, relatively effective, and it does give us the ability to enhance our overall efficiency because we have a nice structured process. Doesn't directly boost memory, but it actually enhances the encoding of information, which has a very measurable effect on your study performance. Okay, now we're moving into the highest tier. There are only 3 spots, which I'm sure you're going to realize by now means there are a lot of techniques that just aren't on this list. Does that mean they're not good? No, absolutely not. That means there are several that can go in. This is the first version of the tier list. There will be several of these because there are just so many. As I said, over 120 of these techniques. We can only do so many on one tier list. But stay tuned, we'll deal with the other very effective techniques in future videos. But here they are. The first one that I think is really important is the Feynman technique. Now, the Feynman technique was derived by Richard Feynman, and he gave us this really incredible study technique. It's really simple to understand as well. And I think this one actually hinges into something that Einstein said as well. This idea that if you truly understand something really well, you should be able to explain it incredibly simply. If you can't explain it simply, that means you don't understand it well enough. That means you need to develop your understanding further. That's the core concept behind this technique. The idea is take whatever you think you've learned, try and explain it to someone else, try and teach someone else. In that process, so many things happen. 1, you're retrieving the information. 2, you're testing your understanding of the information. And you're also able to actually pass on the knowledge. That person will give you feedback. They'll be able to say, well, that doesn't make sense. You get to further think of it. So it's a very semantic process that tests your retrieval and actually enhances your encoding, because if you can teach it to one person and then move on to the next person, every time you enhance your process, the end result is you really come to gain a really good understanding of the information. But take note, the focus here, it's very much a study technique that is focused on encoding to a lesser degree, but it's very semantic, thinking about the information. But the core goal here is practicing our retrieval. So overall, very, very powerful technique. If you aren't using this already, absolutely employ it. Now, I've given it a difficulty rating of a 7 out of 10 because it is relatively challenging. You can test it out. You can't actually explain something simply to someone until you fully understand it. That means you more or less have to learn it, especially if it's a new concept, like how the renal system works, or how the cardiac system works, or how socioeconomic status influences people, or how and why chemicals react in the ways that they do. None of this is simple, but once we begin to get a deep level of understanding, we can actually break it down to its core fundamental processes and explain it very simply. So definitely check out Feynman technique. It should absolutely be part of your repertoire of study techniques. Almost there, 2 to go. This one's a surprise entry, and I guarantee you'll be surprised to see it there. YouTube videos. Now I know what you're thinking. There is no way that YouTube videos are in the diamond tier. They cannot be the highest tier. Surely that's a mistake. Think about this for a second. How long do people spend when they craft their YouTube video? Particularly if you look at top YouTubers. Likely they spend a lot of time thinking about the design. The video itself is designed to engage the audience. It's designed to captivate the audience. It's designed to keep you engaged for the longest possible period, which means it almost borrows from all of these other techniques to enhance the ability for us to gain something from the video. There is still one tiny little problem with them. They're not always that memorable, but in saying that, in my own experience over the last, say, 25, 30 years, I've noticed that this absolutely impacts our ability to come to understand information. The goal test here is, why do you go to YouTube? Why are you watching this video? We seek to gain an understanding of something. We wouldn't do that if it wasn't effective. So there it is. The proof lies in the power of these videos and the way in which they're made. So why are they so effective? Well, they're designed to boost our encoding. They can also serve to test our retrieval of concepts. They should encode things into long-term memory, especially if the video is well designed. And the magic catch here is if we manage to watch the video multiple times, so if we watch multiple different videos, we are creating a sense of repetition and rehearsal, enhancing our retention of the information and encoding it into long-term memory. This is a pretty effective technique. No wonder YouTube's doing so well. It's also low difficulty. It's easy to watch all these YouTube videos, correct? Providing you can stay focused. The last one. This has to be in the top tier. Practice testing. Super, super powerful. Depending on the subject, some subjects benefit tremendously from practice testing. But generally speaking, for all of us, this is one that must be a technique that we use. So what is practice testing? Well, the idea would be taking a pass examination paper, whether it's one that you receive from a teacher or lecturer, or one that you find on the internet all by yourself. You then complete the test paper. And in fact, test papers are the best way to learn information. Think about that for a second. It's meant to test your knowledge of information. In that process, we actually learn a lot of information. We also learn what we don't know. We also learn how to retrieve the information. And thinking back to my own experience, particularly for a subject like chemistry, spent a lot of time, probably at least 3 times more time, trying to understand chemistry when my grades weren't that great when I tried to understand chemistry. But once I switched over to practicing the chemistry, actually doing past papers, that changed everything. So going from like a B minus to an A plus just by doing practice tests or practice testing. So it's really, really powerful. The focus here is on retrieval. And in that process, we're taking information into our long-term memory. We made it. We made it through the tier list. Now, hopefully you found that beneficial. Absolutely try and incorporate as many of these higher tier strategies as you can. There's nothing wrong with using the lower tier strategies, but keep in mind, don't rely on them solely to encode things into your memory. They are merely devices that are there to help us during set periods, or I guess if you're looking for something really simple, they can help us quickly get an understanding. But they're terrible methods, so definitely go for the higher tier methods, incorporate them into your learning, and I guarantee you're going to end up getting better grades, you're going to remember more information, and overall, you're going to find this whole memory thing a whole bunch more pleasurable. If you did find that video useful, absolutely make sure to give the video a like, just to be sure that other people can find it. If you don't give it a like, well, the algorithm thinks it's a bad video. If it's a bad video, no one else is going to see and gain benefit. If you did enjoy the content, make sure you subscribe. I will absolutely do follow-ups on these. Thinking like 1,000 likes? Should we set that condition? If we get to 1,000 likes, I'll make a second version of this. That's quite a lot of work to make all these little graphics, but I feel like it adds a whole new dimension, and there's so much information stacked away, so definitely pause on that if you find benefit. Now, if you seek more information or training on this, definitely check out my website, www.areteerga.com, where I have workshops and even other related content that I'm sure you'll find of benefit, including things like workshops, which I think you'll find incredibly beneficial, where we go into these kind of things in way more detail and customizing it to your learning framework. Well done. I'm going to wish you well on your journey, and I'll see you on the next video.